Hello, thank you so much for the invitation, Deborah. This has been so fun. I enjoyed yesterday thoroughly. The whole group of panelists and everything they had to say, it was absolutely phenomenal. And thank you to Sue and Vanessa as well for your help. Okay, I'm going to get right to it here and share my screen. So the way I'm doing this, I have a list of questions that I put together, trying to anticipate your potential questions to me, but also trying to find questions that I believe are maybe the most common questions my students ask me. And I'll kind of move forward quickly into this first slide. I want to talk about, let me see here. Are you all getting my screen? I think, I do believe you're seeing what I'm seeing, hoping that you do.
We do see it, Tim, thanks.
Okay, I'm trying to advance it and I'm having issues it's not letting me advance. Hold on just 1 second here. Yay! All right, I may have 2 of these up. Let me try one more time real quick here. And there we go. It finally entered into the mode that I'm looking for. All right. First of all, because I work in a university, I'm expected to follow a very clearly established curriculum. And that curriculum usually sort of centers around what Deborah so expertly talked about yesterday, the bel canto technique or the bel canto tradition, which when we really talk about it in a general or broad sense, really is about balancing the voice and the mechanisms involved. We seek to balance tensions and volumes and placements and other extremes. It's a misunderstanding to believe that university programs teach opera. We certainly introduce opera to our juniors and senior level voices, but most undergraduate degrees understand that opera, at least dramatic opera, is an extreme style of singing and therefore should be approached carefully. And there are many others in this world. So my promise to students and to all of you is that when we learn the fundamentals of singing, we qualify ourselves to branch out into the more extreme styles with the tools to negotiate those styles healthily. And this is why you hear about pop, Broadway, or jazz singers who are classically trained and they're able to use that classical training. Tony Bennett was mentioned yesterday. He's a perfect example of this. Now, with this understanding, I want to discuss several of my most frequently asked questions. I have a lot more than we have time for, but I'm going to do my best to try to get through as many as I can. First question, how do I stop my voice from cracking? I just love this question. Now, I'm not talking about cracking that can come from vocal abuse or illness or other excess tensions. And I'm talking about excess tensions not related to just you're having a bad day, but actual like deep set tensions like abdominal tensions or jaw tensions, over adducted vocal folds, things that are take a little bit of time to remove. That can cause cracking of the voice. However, if those problems can be ruled out, I suggest allowing the voice to crack as part of the coordinating process. So in my choir room, I am called the king of crack. Okay, yeah, that's a bit of an unfortunate nickname, but I was trying to teach the principle that freedom in singing can be accompanied by the occasional crack. And it's okay to crack. And so I said confidently to my singers, don't worry about cracking. Look at me. I'm the king of crack. I immediately tried to amend the statement, but the damage was already done. I tried to say, I'm the king of voice cracking, but didn't work. The truth is that a vocal crack can emerge when the breath muscles and the internal muscles of the vocal tract are a little uncoordinated. And in order to coordinate them, we need to feel like we can experiment and get close to what the sensation that I feel in my voice when I sing that feels slightly out of control. That doesn't mean that when I sing properly that I feel out of control, but certainly that it's a delicate process. I think of someone who is walking on a tight wire. There's some of that balancing going on when we sing. Only last Sunday, my family and I were doing karaoke night, which we do all the time. My 14-year-old son was trying to sing the song Surface Pressure from the new Disney film Encanto. It was not in his key, and his voice has recently changed, so he was struggling to keep things on track with regards to his voice cracking. To force his voice to be stable, and that's really an important term there, he was using a very specific tension at the base of the tongue, which was discussed a little bit yesterday, I think, by Kai. This little tension right here, the swallowing muscles, can be a way of stabilizing the voice falsely. And his neck began to stretch up to accommodate that tension. And at the end of the song, the lyrics say, "Who am I if I don't have what it takes? No cracks, no breaks, no mistakes, no pressure." Notwithstanding the amazing voice lesson that's in that phrase all by itself, my son's voice magnificently cracked as he sang the words, "No cracks." So the irony is, it was too much. We all burst into laughter, and my wife and I work really hard to make our home a no judgment zone. So it's not like the laughter was defeating to my son. Instead, it was our way of saying it's okay to crack. The problem is, the first time a singer cracks in choir or singing lessons, they get a glare from their classmates or their teacher, they resolve to never crack again. And they will do that by whatever means possible. And that, to me, is a tragedy. So tension and pressure are the ways that they hold the voice in place and make sure that they don't suffer any social tragedy like cracking. This happens at every level of professional singing. Cracks are part of the singing world, part of the singing life. So if you have cracks happening in your voice, you're trying to stop them from happening, perhaps there's another way you can look at it. The beautiful, wonderful mezzo-soprano Joyce DiDonato, who is right now singing in the Met. She sings all over. She's fantastic. You can look her up. She was working with Stephen Smith, who is an author of a really wonderful book called The Naked Voice. And I recommend it wholly. He says, he talks about working with Joyce and helping her overcome tension in her voice. He says, Joyce's process was indeed long and difficult. During that process, she once performed at a house concert in Houston where she sang a famous Rossini aria. When she got to the high B flat at the end, her voice cracked and the notes splattered all over the place. When she told me about it, I was proud of her because this kind of cracking was an indication that she was releasing the tension in the base of the tongue. And most people avoiding cracking by holding onto that tension in the tongue, which prohibits bloom and freedom in the sound. The key is to let the voice always be cracked, which I love that term, although it can be a little bit out there. But the idea is no tension in the base of the tongue. That way, there's never anything to crack. So I say, get cracked and stay cracked. So, wonderful thoughts and comments about cracking, and I do encourage you to use that moment in time as sort of a launching pad. Let yourself be open to the occasional crack, because when you do, it'll help you find the coordination that will keep you from cracking in the right way. All right, so second question. How do I sing with vibrato? Oh, students ask me this all the time. Questions range from when will I get my vibrato to how can I speed up or slow down my vibrato to how can I get rid of my vibrato. I strive in every situation to encourage the student to be patient and positive, because it can be a very difficult thing. So vibrato takes time to master, and if it's learned incorrectly, it is very hard to unlearn. Vibrato is still a generally mysterious phenomenon. Even as recent as this past October, an article from the journal Voice tried to codify the current theory. summarize the current theory or theories involved. And I'm going to read this quickly. It's not going to make a lot of sense, but I just want you to understand where we're at. Primary physiological source of fundamental frequency modulation, that's the main pitch that we hear in our voice modulating up and down for vibrato, is oscillation of vocal fold length. In other words, making the vocal folds longer, which makes them vibrate faster and higher pitch, or relaxing them, which allows the lower pitch, and that back and forth oscillation. Okay. However, there may be multiple laryngeal and vocal tract sources of intensity modulation that could include oscillation of vocal fold length, degree of vocal fold adduction, laryngeal height, or position of the mandible, tongue, velum, and pharyngeal walls. In addition, although large subglottal pressure variations are not considered typical for Western classical singing, there may be small subglottal pressure modulations that could contribute to modulation of intensity. A combination of these physiological sources of modulation might alter the rate or extent of intensity modulation relative to the fundamental frequency modulation. Oh, that's way crazy. But the thing I want you to take from that is the words may, might, and could. In other words, these are all theories. In other words, we really don't know like specifically what is causing vibrato. And the current science is just not clearly able to understand what happens when a person sings with vibrato. However, there are some really important things to remember when working with vibrato. All principles of healthy, well-balanced vocal production must be present. So if the voice is unhealthy, the vibrato will most likely be unhealthy too. And my personal belief is that there are multiple ways a person can create vibrato. Some of these are prone to slowing down more with age. I think the tongue is a real culprit. When you look at side view angles of people singing in an MRI, if you look those up, some really cool videos of people being videoed live MRIs or whatever, where you can see through the skin layers and see the activation of the tongue and the vocal tract. And you can see tongue movement pretty intensely in some singers and not at all in others. Or some singers on some notes have a lot of tongue movement and other notes that don't, usually extreme ranges and stuff like that. However, when we forego flexibility, freedom, and balanced phonation, or balanced singing, we have any other aspect of healthy singing, by the way, in order to make vibrato happen or to eliminate vibrato. When we forego these balanced properties, we are in danger. We're in danger. When we sing in an ensemble, it is the width, or the extent is another word for it. The extent of the vibrato is how much above the pitch and how much below the pitch it goes. So a really wide vibrato would sound very much out of pitch. And you can hear there's not really a clear fundamental frequency to grab onto with your ears. That's what's really offensive in small ensemble singing. And that can mean barbershop, that can mean, a cappella, that can mean any early music, it can mean anything. Vibrato can be freely used in almost all styles of vocal harmony, as long as the variation above and below the pitch is minimal. Minimal is the word. Thus, my favorite phrase to use when teaching my choirs vibrato is minimize the vibrato, rather than sing it with a straight tone. I am not a big fan of the term straight tone, though the perception might be straight. I still like to keep students flexible and allow them a little bit of that vibrato and have it work. My favorite example is the early Buffalo Bills barbershop quartet, the one that was on the Music Man movie. Wonderful use of vibrato when they sing, and it's got an old school feel to it, of course, but it's certainly great. Aural perceptions. Okay, I want to talk about aural perceptions a little bit. These can aid our efforts to influence the vibrato. In other words, there may be there's that word again, one of the theories for vibrato emerging in a voice is that our ears hear what we hear other people using it, and that we start to allow it to come into our voices by that influence. And I'll be more specific about that in a minute. The researcher Lori Reese is great. She writes a great article about straight tone singing and vibrato. She says some researchers consider the ear so essential to vibrato control as to be its primary adjuster, or at least an integral part of an automatically adjusted control loop. The great question that is out there for me, the next research that I want to do is to try to go to schools where those who are hearing impaired or maybe completely deaf, they're learning how to vocalize their voice and use their voices. And they don't have any oral feedback, so they're trying to find sensations of vocalization. And the question is, they can sustain pitch, but obviously that pitch might meander or wander. Has vibrato ever shown up in those voices? Because the big theory is that it wouldn't, because they don't have the oral feedback to help them. The world-renowned vocalist Ingo Tietze, which is a name you'll probably, I believe he was mentioned yesterday, and he may be mentioned again today. He's the one who developed the semi-occluded straw singing technique and talks about that. He says, by standing close to partners and listening careful to each other, a few people at a time, the mere desire to blend will often drive the vocal systems to do so. It is the ear that drives the blend more than the overt manipulation of the larynx or the articulators. In other words, there is so much the ear can do to help us sing into another person's voice, and we don't even really think about it. It's sort of something that just happens. And the same can be said in the vibrato world as well. So what I tell students is, if you want vibrato in your voice, listen to a really wonderful singer whose vibrato you really like, and sing along with them. And with the freedom and the sense of openness, and let your ear hear that vibrato and let your body sing into that vibrato. You can do that even with big, huge vibrato. You can find a more streamlined vibrato and sing along with them, and it can help with that process. Last thing I want to say about this is anchor points. This term anchor points is something that I have developed in my teaching, and it basically, I noticed early on in my teaching that a student who has straight tone or big vibrato, okay, I always go back and forth between those 2 points, and the big reason for that is because I believe as a choral musician that there is a good case to be made for a very streamlined or minimized vibrato. It's part of our art form to sing chords that are very clustered and need a very streamlined sound as part of our art form. And to take that away from us, I get my dukes up just a little bit. But I also am a soloist, and I sing with full vibrato. And so I like to talk about both sides of the coin. The anchor points, if I hear a student get to a song and let's say they've got big vibrato that's kind of unwieldy, there's a random note in the middle of the song or in a warm-up where that vibrato streamlines. I immediately isolate it, and I say, something about the way you're producing your tone right there is much more efficient and much more freely produced. And let's take that and make that an anchor point. And you can put it in part of a warm-up into your singing that day and over the next week. And the same thing can be said for actually finding vibrato. If you'd like to have vibrato come into your voice, most of the time as I'm building freedom of production, it's really interesting that freedom of production is required for a good vibrato to emerge. And the reason for that is most likely because of tensions in the muscles sort of keeping that vibrato at bay. So as students relieve that tension, it starts to show up, or at least the ears perhaps are allowed to then influence a vibrato into the voice? Well, it'll show up on a single note, and then students will immediately start to notice it. And I'll say, there's your anchor point. Go take that, sing that phrase a couple more times, and see if you can enhance. That's the word we like to use. And we do have control over vibrato. We have the ability to influence it faster and slower. All of that research is very widely accepted, and it's out and available for people to look at. I know I'm running out of time here, but I'm going to move on and do my best to get through this next one. I wanted to include one question that was not connected specifically to vocal technique, but that I get asked about all the time. Without getting into the weeds of the current science behind memory, students want to know how to memorize a song. Well, my memory is bad. I don't know how to memorize this. And so I'm going to give a few suggestions. And the first is, ask yourself, what kind of learner am I? What are your strategies for learning when you study for a test or whatever? Do you need to be by yourself? Do you like to use music? Do you have, what are your tactics and techniques? And if you don't have any, it's a good thing to reach out and find what those things are. Most adults have several tactics that they've used as they've been in school and so forth, and use those to help you when you're memorizing. If you're a barber shopper, you know how hard it is with those variations and so forth. But let me just say, sleep is key. Most memory encoding happens during sleep. So the more complex the memory, the more sleep is required. And it goes against the up all night. Like, students love to do that, cram for a test and stay up all night. It really isn't helpful. Compare and contrast material. Summarize what was learned, or summarize what you went through in like a quartet coaching or something like that. And make a rhyme out of keys and turn the learning into a non-linguistic representation, like a drawing or a comic strip. Where are we with time, Sue? Am I out of time? Am I close to being out of time? I'm right at my
We have about 3 minutes, but there is a question, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, I love it. Go for it.
Let's see. I'm trying to find it. Let's see. Hold on. Let's see if they put it in here. Does vibrato show up more with certain vowels, or is it more breathing techniques?
Very good question. The vowels definitely can influence the vibrato, and it's not the vowel per se, it's the tension in the tongue that's accompanying the vowel production. And so a lot of the things that my colleagues have been sharing about vowel freedom and base of the tongue freedom, I actually request my students all the time that if you feel your chin, the hard point of your chin, and then move it back and then until it goes up and in, and then swallow. And if you feel that muscle moving down and pushing down, I will ask my students to read as part of their daily practice, to read a paragraph or a page or two of their textbook or whatever they're reading that day, and work to make that less interactive as they read. So trying to allow the voice to come up over the top of the tongue, rather than setting tension in and feeling like you have to flex the tongue to create the tone. So that's just one example.
That's great, Tim. In the minute that we have left, we have probably 3 or 4 people who've posted the same question, and that is the control of vibrato as the voice ages, or addressing the affectations of that.
So good. And that is definitely a struggle. And I will say, as you get older, the muscles are less elastic, and they're less responsive. And so there's going to be a slowing down. But let me reiterate what I said, that it's not necessarily the presence, it's the extent. And so a lot of the free flowing things that Deborah talks about, the bel canto technique, can really streamline the vibrato. So don't let your goal be straight tone. Even in barbershop, like I say, don't let your goal necessarily be perfectly straight tone. Let it be as minimized of vibrato as you can muster. And tensions and pressures and grabbing or holding, those all will contribute to wide vibrato, very, very wide vibrato. So work to free things up, and that should make a difference.
Thank you, Tim. Wonderful presentation. And we're applauding for you here, even though you can't hear it.
That's okay. Thank you.